Well, well, well. Look who is still standing. You were supposed to break by now, weren't you? That's what the timeline said. That's what everyone quietly assumed when they watched you lose the job, lose the relationship, lose the version of your life that used to feel safe. They expected the collapse. They were almost waiting for it, the way people wait for a storm to finally hit the house they always said was built wrong. But you didn't collapse. You did something far more unsettling. You went quiet, and you kept moving. Somewhere in that silence, something started watching you that you didn't know was watching. Not the people who left, not the people who whispered. Someone else. Someone with actual weight to put behind a decision. Someone who doesn't waste attention on people who fold the first time it gets dark. And right now, today, while you're sitting there wondering if anyone noticed how hard the last stretch actually was, I need you to understand something. They noticed. Every single day of it. Before we go any further, I need to be honest with you about something. This channel has been demonetized, which means none of this reaches you with any support behind it unless that support comes directly from you. If these words are landing the way they're supposed to land, there is a super thanks link sitting in the description below, and even the smallest amount from you is what keeps content like this alive and coming back to you. Nothing else in this video depends on that click, but if you're able to make it, it matters more than you'd think. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about timing. This is the story of what happens when a person keeps choosing faith in a moment that was practically begging them to choose fear, and what that choice quietly built behind their back while they weren't looking. So sit with that for a second, because what I'm about to tell you isn't motivation. It's a report, and the report has your name on it. Nobody hands you a syllabus for this part of life. Nobody tells you that the worst stretch you've ever walked through was actually being graded, scored, recorded somewhere you couldn't see. You just lived it. You woke up tired and went anyway. You smiled when you didn't feel like smiling, not because you were faking it, but because something in you refused to let the bad days win the headline. You called it surviving. Other people, watching from a distance you didn't know existed, called it something else entirely. They called it proof. Because here's the part nobody explains to you when everything is falling apart at once. The bills, the silence from people who used to call. The nights where the fear tried to climb into bed with you and convince you it had a better plan than faith did. Every time you said no to that voice, every time you chose to keep showing up instead of shutting down, you were being measured against a standard most people never even attempt to meet. Most people break at the first real test. You didn't. You just kept your head down and called it Tuesday. That's the part that gets missed in every story about hardship. The assumption that struggle is just something that happens to you. It isn't. Struggle is a filter. It separates the people who fold under pressure from the people who quietly recalibrate and keep walking, and it does this without ever announcing the results out loud. You were never told you were being filtered. You just kept choosing the harder, quieter option of faith, over and over, in rooms nobody else was standing in. And the wild part, the part you need to actually sit with, is that you did it without an audience. Nobody clapped. Nobody posted about it. There was no applause for the night you chose to pray instead of panic. No trophy for the morning you got up anyway, after crying yourself to sleep the night before. You did the hardest version of this, completely unwitnessed. And that is exactly why it counted the way it did. Things done for an audience get performed. Things done in private get proven. So before we go any further, I need you to drop the idea that this stretch of your life was wasted time. It wasn't wasted. It was the entrance exam, and you didn't even know you were sitting it. You just kept choosing the long, uncertain road of faith over the short, loud comfort of fear, and somewhere along the way, that choice started accumulating weight. Weight that someone, somewhere, was already starting to take seriously. Let's talk about what faith actually looked like in your case, because it wasn't loud and it wasn't pretty, and it definitely wasn't the version they show in the highlight reels. Faith, for you, looked like getting up on the mornings when getting up made no logical sense. It looked like sending one more application after the 11th rejection. It looked like staying decent to people who had already decided you weren't worth decency, simply because you refused to let their behavior dictate your character. Nobody saw the discipline in that. You barely saw it yourself. Fear, meanwhile, was always right there, offering the easier deal. Fear told you to quit reaching out. Fear told you to assume the worst before the worst even arrived, just so you wouldn't be caught off guard. Fear told you that hoping for something better was naive, that the safest move was to expect nothing so nothing could disappoint you. And on plenty of nights, fear's offer sounded reasonable. It sounded like protection. But you kept turning it down anyway, quietly, without ceremony, choice after choice after choice. Here's what almost nobody tells you about that kind of repeated, unglamorous choosing. It builds something. It's not a moment, it's a pattern, and patterns are the only thing that actually get noticed by anyone paying real attention. One good day proves nothing. 100 quiet days where you chose to keep believing instead of keep bracing, that proves something undeniable. That's not a personality trait anymore at that point. That's a track record. And track records get read, not by the people closest to you, who are usually too busy with their own storms to clock the shift happening in yours. Track records get read by the people positioned slightly above the noise, the ones whose job, whose instinct, whose entire approach to life involves watching for exactly this kind of pattern in other people. You weren't performing for them. You didn't even know they existed. But the pattern doesn't care who's watching. It just keeps being recorded. So every time you think back on that stretch and feel embarrassed about how hard you had to fight just to stay decent, just to stay hopeful, just to stay you, I want you to reframe what you're actually remembering. You're not remembering weakness. You're remembering the exact footage that eventually got someone's attention. The choice felt small in the moment. It was never small. It was the entire case being built in your favor. You probably assumed, like most people do, that the only eyes on you during the hard years belonged to the critics, the ones who watched to confirm you'd fail, the ones who quietly hoped the story would end the way they predicted it would, because your collapse would have made their own choices feel safer by comparison. That kind of watching is real, and it's exhausting. And most of this genre of content spends all its time talking about exactly that audience. We're not talking about them today. There is another category of observer that almost nobody warns you about, because almost nobody experiences them directly enough to talk about it with confidence. These are the people who track resilience the way scouts track talent, quietly, patiently, without ever announcing themselves until the moment is right. They are not interested in your highlight reel. They are interested in what you do when nobody is filming, when the outcome is uncertain, when faith costs you something and fear would have been free. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you in the best possible way. While you thought you were simply getting through another difficult month, somewhere a tally was being kept of every time you chose to stay grounded instead of spiral, every time you extended grace instead of bitterness, every time you kept your standards intact, even while your circumstances were falling apart around you. You weren't being graded on whether hard things happened to you. Hard things happen to everyone. You were being graded on what you did with your hands while they were happening. And the count was not flattering toward your doubters. While they spent their energy predicting your downfall, you spent yours quietly becoming someone worth watching for an entirely different reason. The people counting weren't counting your failures, because there weren't enough of them to build a case. They were counting your returns. Every single time life knocked you down, and you got back up without losing the softness in your eyes or the steadiness in your hands that got logged somewhere you couldn't see. This is why the next part of your life is going to feel disorienting at first. You spent so long bracing for consequences that you forgot consequences come in more than one direction. Consistency gets paid eventually. It's just rarely paid by the people you expected, and it's almost never paid on the timeline you were hoping for. But it gets paid, and your account, quietly, patiently, has been accruing for longer than you realize. There is a room that exists in every industry, every circle, every community, a A room you've never been inside and probably never will be, where decisions about who gets elevated next are actually made. You weren't in it. You couldn't have been. But your name has come up in rooms like that more often than you think, mentioned by people whose opinion of you was formed not by what you said about yourself, but by what they observed from a distance, while you thought no one was paying attention. This is uncomfortable to sit with, because it means a version of your reputation has existed outside of your own control for a while now, shaped entirely by your actions instead of your announcements. You didn't get to manage that narrative. You didn't pitch yourself in that room. Someone simply watched the pattern, watched the choices, watched the way you handled pressure when pressure had every reason to turn you bitter, and they drew their own conclusions without asking your permission first. Most people find that idea terrifying, the thought that they're being evaluated somewhere they can't see or influence. But you should find it the opposite of terrifying, because unlike every performance you've ever given for an audience that was actually watching, this evaluation was based entirely on the truest version of you, the one that shows up when there's nothing to gain from showing up well. That's the only version of a person that actually means anything to someone serious about identifying who's worth investing in. The influential ones, the ones with the actual ability to open a door instead of just admiring you from a distance, rarely make their interest known early. They watch quietly for longer than feels fair, because they've been burned before by people who looked promising under pressure and then crumbled the moment real opportunity arrived. They are not interested in potential, they are interested in proof. And proof, by definition, can only be gathered over time, under conditions you didn't choose and couldn't control. So if you've ever wondered why nothing seemed to be happening for so long, why the door stayed shut no matter how hard you knocked, here's a piece of context you didn't have before. The door wasn't shut because no one was paying attention. The door was shut because someone was still gathering the proof, and proof takes exactly as long as it takes. It does not move faster because you're impatient. It moves at the speed of consistency, and your consistency has been quietly writing the file this whole time. Here's where the story turns, and I want you to actually feel the weight of this turn instead of rushing past it. At some point, recently or about to happen, depending on where exactly you are in your own timeline, the watching stopped being passive. Someone moved from observing you to actively deciding something about you. That is an entirely different category of attention, and it does not happen by accident. It happens because the file got full enough that a decision became unavoidable. You should understand what this actually means in practical terms, because it isn't abstract. Somewhere, a conversation has happened, or is about to happen, where your name was raised not as a cautionary tale, but as a candidate. Not a candidate for sympathy, a candidate for opportunity. The kind of opportunity that doesn't get advertised publicly, doesn't get applied for through a form, and doesn't go to the loudest person in the room. It goes to the person whose pattern made the decision easy. This is the part where I tell you plainly what's coming, because vague hope has never built anything, and you've earned more than vague hope at this point. Recognition is on its way to you, not as a vague cosmic gesture, but as an actual, specific, identifiable shift, delivered through a real channel, by a real person or a real circumstance that has been quietly tracking your consistency and has decided the time for watching is over. The reward is not symbolic, it is structural. It is going to change what your days look like. And here's the detail that should genuinely steady you if anything still feels unstable right now. This kind of recognition does not arrive for people who simply had a good month. It arrives for people whose pattern was strong enough, for long enough, that betting on them stopped feeling like a risk and started feeling like the obvious move. You are not being rewarded for surviving hardship. You are being rewarded for what the hardship revealed about how you operate when no shortcuts are available. So if something in your gut has been telling you lately that a shift is close, that the air around your circumstances has started to feel different even though nothing concrete has changed yet, trust that instinct completely. You're not imagining it. You're sensing the early edge of a decision that's already been made about you by someone with the actual ability to act on it, and the only thing left now is the timing of the reveal. You're going to wonder, and it's a fair question, why this particular form of attention found you, instead of someone louder, someone more visible, someone who seemed, on paper, more obviously deserving of being noticed. The answer is simpler than you'd expect, and slightly uncomfortable for everyone who skipped the part where you were quietly doing the work. The people who get chosen for real opportunity are almost never the ones who announce their faith the loudest. They are the ones whose faith held up the longest without an audience to perform it for. Loud confidence is cheap, and the people doing the choosing know that better than anyone. They've watched plenty of people talk a strong game right up until the moment things actually got difficult, at which point the performance evaporated and the fear underneath got exposed for everyone to see. You never had the luxury of performing confidence, because nobody was watching closely enough to make performance worth the effort. So you did the only thing left available to you. You built the real thing, quietly, out of necessity rather than strategy. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. Strategy can be copied. Necessity cannot. The version of resilience you built was forged under conditions that can't be faked or shortcut, conditions where quitting would have been completely understandable and nobody would have blamed you for it. The fact that you didn't quit under those exact conditions is precisely what separates you from the candidates who looked impressive on a stage, but had never actually been tested in the dark. This is also why the recognition coming your way is going to feel earned rather than lucky, because it is earned in the most literal sense available. You paid for it in the currency that actually matters to people who control real opportunity, which is time spent choosing the harder right thing when the easier wrong thing was sitting right there, free of charge, every single day. Most people spend that currency on bitterness instead. You spent it on faith repeatedly, without knowing it would ever be exchanged for anything. So when this reward does land, and it is landing, don't let anyone, including the quiet voice in your own head, convince you it's undeserved or accidental. It's neither. It's the most deserved thing that has happened to you in years, calculated down to the smallest detail by someone who was paying closer attention than you ever gave them credit for, precisely because you never knew to look for them in the first place. Let's get specific, because vague promises are for people who don't actually know what they're talking about, and I respect you too much to leave this part fuzzy. The reward rarely shows up the way the daydream version of it looked in your head. It doesn't usually arrive with fireworks. It arrives as access. A door that used to be locked is suddenly, quietly unlocked. A conversation you didn't have to fight your way into simply opens up in front of you, because someone on the other side already decided, based on everything they'd observed, that you were worth letting in. Sometimes it looks like a person reaching out who you never expected to reach out, someone whose attention alone changes the trajectory of what's possible for you. Sometimes it looks like a resource, a position, an introduction, a piece of information arriving at exactly the moment it becomes useful instead of a moment too late. The common thread across every version of this is the same. It removes an obstacle you'd been grinding against for a long time, and it removes it suddenly, almost effortlessly, in a way that makes the years of grinding finally make sense. You should also expect this reward to feel slightly disorienting at first, because faith built under pressure doesn't always know what to do with sudden ease. You've spent so long bracing for the next difficulty that relief can feel unfamiliar, even suspicious. That reaction is normal, and it fades quickly once you understand what's actually happening. This isn't a trick. This isn't too good to be true. This is simply the moment where the pattern you built finally gets matched with a circumstance large enough to use it properly. What's coming is not going to ask you to abandon the version of yourself that survived the hard years. It's going to ask you to bring that exact version forward, the patient one, the steady one, the one who doesn't panic when things move quickly, because panic was never your default setting to begin with. The qualities that got you noticed are the same qualities that are going to keep you standing once the door opens. Nothing about who you had to become gets wasted in this next part. It all transfers directly. So prepare yourself, not by changing who you are, but by trusting who you already became. The reward isn't going to require a different person than the one who walked through everything that came before it. It's going to require exactly this person, just finally placed somewhere big enough to be seen properly, by someone who already decided a while ago that this was coming. You're going to start noticing small signals before the larger reveal arrives, and I want you prepared for them instead of confused by them. People you haven't spoken to in a while will resurface, often with a slightly different energy than before. More interested, more attentive, as though something about you has changed even though you feel exactly the same as you did last week. That's not your imagination. That's the early ripple of a decision already made, reaching the people around you before it reaches you directly. You might also notice a strange settling in your own chest, a quiet confidence that wasn't manufactured and didn't come from anything you did intentionally. That settling is your body catching up to something your faith already knew long before your circumstances confirmed it. Faith, the real kind, always arrives slightly ahead of evidence. That's the entire definition of it. What you're feeling now is the gap between faith and evidence finally closing, and it closes quietly before it closes publicly. Pay attention to timing during this stretch, because timing is going to start working with you instead of against you, in ways that will feel almost engineered. A message arrives exactly when you needed it. An opportunity opens exactly when you'd reached your limit with the old situation. None of this is coincidence, and none of it requires you to do anything dramatic to earn it further. The earning already happened, across every quiet day you chose not to give up. This stretch is simply the collection phase. There will also be a temptation, and I want to name it directly so it doesn't catch you off guard, to rush the process, to force the reveal before it's ready, out of sheer impatience after waiting this long. Resist that completely. The same patience that built your case in the first place is the patience that's going to let it land properly instead of prematurely. Rushed rewards tend to collapse. Earned rewards, allowed to arrive on their own timeline, tend to last. So stay exactly as steady as you've been, because steady is precisely what got you here. And steady is exactly what's going to carry you through the next part without losing any of the weight this moment is supposed to have. You didn't rush the hard years. Don't rush the good ones either. Let this unfold at the pace it was always going to unfold at, because that pace was never actually in your hands to begin with.